We're going to discuss how pitch is notated in music. Pitch is notated graphically on a set of 5 lines and the spaces that surround the lines that is called the staff. And when a note is placed on the staff, the higher it is, or the closer to the top, the higher the pitch will be. The lower a note is placed on the staff, the lower the pitch will be. Just these few lines alone are not enough information to tell us what precise pitch we are talking about, because if you think about the entire range of the piano, this is not nearly enough space to tell you exactly which note. So what needs to happen is the staff needs to be augmented by a clef. And a clef tells us specifically what region of the piano keyboard or what notes specifically are being notated. These are 4 of the most common clefs that are used, basically the only clefs that are used commonly anymore these days. The treble clef and the bass clef are the 2 clefs that we will be using in Music 110 and that you will be held responsible for this semester. Pitches are labeled using the first 7 letters of the alphabet. So you go from A to G and then start over at A and so on and so on. So they're reused and over and over again. So we'll start first by looking at the treble clef. The treble clef sign is commonly known as the G clef. That is because this curly end, the curly tail of the clef, circles the G line. So that's one way, one landmark as it were, to help you know what note is what. So we have E, G, B, D, and F are the names of the notes when placed on the treble clef lines. Oftentimes people like to use mnemonics to help remember what the notes are, and a couple of common ones are every good boy deserves fudge or every good boy deserves fine. They're not very poetic. You may be able to come up with something more interesting, but for many people that is a useful tool. The spaces in between the lines in the treble clef, F-A-C-E, spell the word face. So that's a pretty easy one to remember. So you'll see that the notes go up sequentially. A line is E, space is F, G is the line, A is the space, B is the line, C is the space, and so forth. The bass clef is the second clef that we will be using this semester. Bass clef is also known as the F clef, and that is because these 2 dots are surrounding the F line. And as you see here, the lines in the bass clef are G, B, D, F, and A. Or you can think of good boys do fine always. And the spaces A, C, E, and G. Now, just the staff alone, even when you've got the two staffs, the treble clef staff and the bass clef staff, are not really enough to cover all the notes. So another tool that is used is little staff extensions, which are called ledger lines, and you can use ledger lines above the staff or below the staff. When ledger lines are necessary, you must use a complete set of ledger lines for each individual note, and you never want to connect through the ledger lines. The reason for this is because visually you want to be able to look at the staff quickly and tell what note you've got. And if you start collecting ledger lines, pretty soon you've got 6-line staff and a 7-line staff, and that just gets very confusing. Treble clef staff and the bass clef staff are often combined into one large staff, which is called the grand staff. The way that you can tell that you're dealing with one staff, which the grand staff, as opposed to just 2 separate lines, is usually when you've got a grand staff, there's some kind of a bracket on the end, and bar lines over here tend to go through, both sets of staves. The first ledger line below the treble staff and above the bass clef staff is known as middle C. These seemingly looking two notes are actually the same note. They represent exactly the same key on the piano, and they are the connector between the two staffs. So if you look, then we go sequentially from F below the bass clef, B, C, that's the same line, D, E, and all the way up to the treble staff. So when you have the grand staff, you've got quite a long distance of notes all sequentially up the alphabet to A to G, start over A to G, start over A to G. Here's the same grand staff with a representation of a piano keyboard. Middle C on the piano is literally the C which is closest to the middle piano. If you are not a pianist and used to the keyboard, the middle C is generally the C which is closest to the piano brand name as well. That's another helper indicator if you're not a pianist yet. Now, back to ledger lines. By using ledger lines below the treble clef staff and above the bass clef staff, it is possible to write certain notes in two different ways. And the notes within this bracket are doing just that. One thing to remember is that the first ledger line here and here, this middle C, is one ledger line. So that ledger line represents, on all of these notes, represents middle C. The next ledger line is exactly the same as this first line in bass clef. This ledger line is the second line in the bass clef, and so forth. So if we have the middle C ledger line, the top bass clef line, and then the space below that line is a G, and this is also a G. And the converse is true for going above the bass clef into treble clef. So when you're trying to read these ledger lines, that's one aid that you can use to help you figure out what's going on there. Reading ledger lines can be a challenge, especially when you get many ledger lines. So there is a common practice, which is using the 8VA symbol, or in Italian, Italian is used for many musical turns, ottava. This indicates that the notes written this indicates that the notes are actually written an octave lower than they want to be played. It makes it much easier to read. So if you're playing along, you have C, E, G, C, E with the 8VA actually is supposed to be this E. It would be performed with this G and with this C. But this is much easier to read, and it keeps the clutter. If you've got many staves, as you would on a page of music, it also keeps this from cluttering the staff above it. So it's just for ease of reading. Conversely, if you want to go below the bass clef staff or below the treble clef staff, actually the same thing works. 8VB or ottava bassa is used. So again, we have notes going downward, and then this symbol indicates that really you should continue down, and these notes are played an octave lower than they're written. Much easier to perform. And your bonus info for the day. Back on the first page there were the graphics of the alto and the tenor clefs. These clefs will not be used this semester, but they will be useful as you continue your music education. Both alto and tenor clefs are C clefs, and that means that this indentation in the clef indicates where middle C is. So in alto clef, which is the clef most frequently used by violas. Middle C is here, so it takes the middle C, the bottom two treble clef lines, and the top two bass clef lines, since that is the region that the viola most commonly plays on. Tenor clef puts the middle C in the fourth line, so these three lines are the equivalent of the top three lines of the bass clef. This line is the the bottom line of the treble clef. Tenor clef is commonly used for bassoon and cello and trombone when they go up into the upper range, so as to not have so many ledger lines.